Good day to you. This is Outer Galactic bringing you another science presentation. We are in the Unimetrics series. Unimetrics simply refers to spherical geometry. Spherical geometry has now been shown to be a viable option for science. And what does that do for us? Well, yesterday we were able to use this geometry to help us evaluate one of the aspects of the quantum paradox called coordination. Now, you have never heard of entanglement by that name because the convention now is to refer to this phenomenon as entanglement, which is actually a term from the logic system that's used to evaluate quantum mechanics. Entanglement is therefore pertaining to the logic. It's entangled logic. But in the actual experimentation that's done, the phenomenon that's set in order to study it should not be called entanglement because that is simply the wrong word. It's actually the opposite of the right word. And that's quite typical now because science, of course, it's not able to monitor itself. It has a mind of its own, as we say colloquially. But the fact that this phenomenon is called entanglement is a sign of disease. And I insist on that. It may seem trivial. It's not. It's not entanglement, and it shouldn't be called that, and nobody ever disambiguates it, so it's an accepted memic phenomena. Propaganda, brainwashing, highly antithetical to true science. So entanglement is a very good word, just as is Big Bang, and just as is black hole. And I could list another 20 terms that are designed to baffle, confuse, and confound you and leave you at their mercy. So I don't want you to be at their mercy, whoever they are, because they are training you to regard reality exactly the way it's going to kill you, so that you will accept the inevitable, no matter how evil it is. So that's reality in the human sense. Technology is going nowhere, okay? So that's the end of science in that direction. It failed. So we're left with the question of what good is science at all? And that brings us back to original philosophy, which is where we should be at now. I apparently am one of the only men who still regards this aspect of science seriously, because there's an instinct, according to our blueprint, to regard science as a valid approach to the universe, which I accept fully, obviously. But that can easily be corrupted into the opposite. We can't avoid philosophy now. It's being recognized. Science is being forced to regard religion again. And this is the ancient hatred, the tension that exists between the religious side of humanity and another side of humanity that is not religious at all. Now, what is meant by religion? Indeed, what is meant by philosophy? All of these questions are begging the ultimate question. What is the meaning of doing science? Do you have an answer? This is an open question. Everyone has to ask themselves this. This is what we should be talking about. What is science for? Well, if you say it's for technology, you lose. You're wrong. So, same question. So I'm going to give you my answer. This is not optional. To deal with these solutions in context, otherwise they have no meaning. What did we learn yesterday? The solution, so that you will finally understand entanglement. I hope I was successful in getting that across. But I promise to go over it again because, by definition, the solution that I have been given requires that you engage it and utilize it. Otherwise, it has no purpose. There is a natural curiosity in men that satisfies us just by satisfying our curiosity. So, in that sense, it may not be necessary to attach a goal, that's the goal, is just to know more. But I'm sorry, that's just not good enough. You actually have to ask yourself one more question or you will not be oriented correctly. So I'm going to guide you into proper orientation to this solution so you'll be able to use it constructively, that it does have meaning. So, first of all, what is the quantum paradox? Second of all, why is it so important to understand it? And finally, assuming that you can understand it, which I've proved that you can, certainly to a brand new threshold, you will actually be able to penetrate the paradox itself and visualize the solution and understand that it's mathematically compatible with everything that physics knows. I don't know how you could have a better answer than the right one, the actual answer. But what is it? What did we learn? Well, in short, just to answer these questions in sequence, the quantum paradox is the cutting edge on a vector of science, which is one of the two main vectors. So this is one of the two absolute solutions to the universe. These are the endpoints of science. The other one, of course, is cosmology. Cosmology, an apprehension of reality. Reality is a tricky word, and so I'm going to change that because reality actually can be construed as crossing over a boundary to human reality. Science, at least in physics, is not interested in human reality. It's interested in universal reality that applies to humans. That is, things we can measure, study, and understand. If you say that's a goal in itself, that's up to you. But if you're wise, you will ask yourself one final question. It's the actual question. How does this change you? How does this affect your life course? Is this beneficial to you? I assume at all times that you are looking for personal insight into the universe. But always I assume that by personal, I know what I mean by that, but I actually don't because I don't know you. So I have to assume something about you. What you're after. What are you looking for? Why are you interested in these lecture series, for instance, that I'm producing? Do you see any difference in the way I produce science and the way it's produced otherwise elsewhere? I do. A huge difference. It's a complete difference in orientation. So, what is my orientation? What did I gain out of this? Perhaps you could benefit from that, just to have an example, a starting point for how this might help a human. How did it perhaps help me? What do I think I got out of it? Well, now that I've asked that question, perhaps I should attempt to answer it. Put myself on the hot seat. Yeah. So I'm asking myself this. And trying to express it to you. To see how you feel about my response. What I think this is good for. All right. That's a fair question. Let's take that. The nature of the quantum paradox is such that we're attempting to find the building blocks of the universe. In attempting to get to the center of the building block system, we proceeded down through the molecular level, and that was in the 19th century. We had pretty much figured out the molecular level of things, but nobody could figure out the atom. And then in the 20th century, the atom was discovered, such that it could be measured and proved to have a structure. This is the atom that we were taught in school that's composed of electrons and protons. That's not all the particles. He forgot one. No, I didn't. The atom only has two particles in it. It has an electron and a proton. Because of my insight that I've gained through spherical geometry, I was able to evaluate the proton and neutron. And it's easily discoverable that the proton and the neutron are exactly the same particle. There's no difference between those particles as such, except the neutron is in the altered state, and so the proton is both particles, and it should be called a proton. Now, when you need to, you can treat the two particles as separate because they do have two utterly distinct properties. The neutron is said to have no charge. The concept of charge is from electrodynamics. And so an electrodynamical property of electricity and magnetism is directly applied to the atom as if that were the most natural thing in the world, is that the proton has a valence of positive and the electron has a valence of negative. That is absolutely incorrect. Absolutely incorrect. In electrodynamics, you can make it work with linear mathematics and calculus. And that is what makes electrodynamics one of the most debilitating, destructive, horrendous systems that's ever been developed by the mind of man. Electrodynamics is fantastically corrupt. It gives a completely wrong impression of the universe. And when the valence system of plus minus is applied to the atomic system like you just already know that, you never go back and review your notes to see if really that's what it is in the atom, then you never can figure anything out. And you get the quantum paradox because of your mathematics combined with your stupidity. So there's two culprits for the quantum paradox. The first thing you must conquer is your own mathematics. And the second thing you have to conquer is your own stupidity. And you must do both. And they're separate steps. And the one that brings you down to the mud, face down in your stupidity and ignorance, is by far the hardest one to face for modern, godlike scientists. Those guys can't stand to be wrong. They'd lose their lives. Their spirit would depart from their body if they ever found out they were wrong about anything. Well, that's not a scientist. If you're incapable of repentance, which all that means is you change your mind, but you're no longer capable of changing your mind, then you've got a problem that you cannot solve. And that's the only problem you have left, is you're stupid and don't know it and can't fix it. And that's what I see. That's exactly how I view the scientific community, as a herd of blind rats. So that may sound a little extreme, anti-human, just very unkind. Honey, in science, you can't afford to be sympathetic. You can't afford humanitarian concerns. These men are occupying a position of authority that they did not earn, and they do not discharge correctly, and in fact, they have become the enemy itself. So I don't want that for you. So in approaching quantum mechanics, we're approaching the edge that science has reached, beyond which it no longer can go. Science has lost its virility, It's lost its reason for existence. Nothing is left now except technology, but the fallout to the public is absolutely execrable. All that's happening is you're being brainwashed. That's it. That's the only game left in town, is to brainwash you. And it's become so easy to just brainwash people that they don't even know they've been brainwashed. They don't know that it's being reinforced every day, because the common Joe is just like the goddamn scientists themselves. They've no perspective whatsoever. No sense of reality. Just this blind desire to know. Well, then all that's left at the end is the power struggle and the paycheck at the end of the day, and whoever gets the most money wins. It's just business as usual, but now you call it science. The same thing as coal mining. You're just serving the government until your life force runs out. And whatever you thought, believed, raged about, or voted about no longer matters because you're dead. And who won? You have to ask yourself who benefited from all your effort. Sure wasn't you. All you were was another statistic among 16 billion humans, half of whom are alive right now. No difference between you and everyone else. Equally stupid, equally ignorant, equally unsuccessful, and equally dead. So without the ability to see further than your death, you have not answered any question to its logical conclusion, because pretty soon, honey, you're gonna be dead. And what do we tell ourselves about that nasty fact? Complete and total Walt Disney fantasy illusion. Ask yourself, where are you going to be after you're dead? What are you told to think about that? Have you ever wondered where you got your impression of death from? You've never experienced it. You're undoubtedly acquainted with it. If your beloved dog died, well, that just tears a human in half. Once their dog dies, then they understand death. It's horrendous. But then to apply it to yourself, nothing. That's what you're brainwashed to do. Your death, blank. Just a complete blank. And if you're pushed, perhaps under the influence of alcohol, trying to make an impression with some other wise guy, and you're jousting with your separate bodies of knowledge about the ultimate destiny of a man after death, well, I think you know what the conversation is going to be like. You can predict what these men are going to say about death. It's going to be something absolutely ridiculous. Well, I don't really care what happens after death because I won't be alive. Really? Well, then you've really thought it out perfectly. That's the right answer. You don't care. Ha! So we'll go back to work then. Collect your paycheck and eat and drink, for tomorrow you shall die. Well, if you don't have any sense of continuity in your life, then you're not going to get anything out of quantum mechanics. Because here's what I'm going to tell you to close this off. The takeaway that you should get, at the very least, from the discovery that I made in quantum mechanics using this geometry that solves the paradox, one of the key insights constituting metanoia, the change of mind, the repentance from one way of thinking to a new way of thinking, that's called metanoia, repentance. All it means is you change direction. You're going this way, you stop, and you change direction. That's repentance. It has a religious connotation, doesn't it? You better get used to that, Charlie. Everything has a religious connotation. You've been brainwashed not to think that way. So as the Buddhists have been known to say in some of their writings, there are only two events that truly matter if you're going to just narrow it down: your birth and your death. Everything else is just a footnote in between those two. I think you can see that that is invoking a perception of continuity. Continuity. Here's the difference. Your life is linear. It's separated into quantized event points. And as you live, you cannot be in the now. You cannot be here now. You cannot see the self of yourself because time is continuous. And so you experience it as something that is continuous. But it's not, because your life is finite. And in a finite system, it's quantized. There's no infinity in your life. Let me ask you something. Is there infinity in the universe? We've shown that there is. There is an infinity in the universe, but not in your life. You know why? It's because you're inside the universe. And therefore, wherever you are in the universe, you're inside a finite system. The universe has to be finite, or it wouldn't be. I hope you understand that aspect. If you don't, accept it because it's true, and then think about it until you realize it is true. That your life has two aspects. It's finite, and it's continuous. That is the difference between linear mathematics and spherical mathematics. Linear mathematics has no comprehension of one half of reality. I'm going to say half just to keep it simple. No perception of continuity. None. And all philosophical perception of continuity was lost in the 19th century in the rise of the Industrial Revolution. Everybody up to approximately James Clerk Maxwell assumed that time was continuous and space is continuous. And then everything went to hell. Everything is quantized now because the linear number system demands it. Because the linear number system has no geometry of continuity. Only spherical geometry incorporates continuity. And we discovered that in the last lecture, didn't we? That continuity is what is missing in science. The perception of continuity is what's missing. The reason for the rise of the real numbers was to attempt to make the straight line continuous. A desperate effort at a fool's errand that everybody, including Hilbert and Cantor, were just too stupid to see. They just could not see their hand in front of their fucking face. And so they went along with the industrial vector and tried to make this straight line continuous. And now they tell you they succeeded. No, they didn't succeed. And the quantum mechanical paradox proves that they did not succeed in making the straight line continuous. There's only one way to get continuity into mathematics, and that's to change to the continuous number system. The two-fraction system that we developed, which constitutes spherical geometry, has continuity built in on the surface of the sphere because it's a curved surface. So that's where we find time is in this other dimension, and that's the other dimension. In linear dimensionality, you have a confused grid that begins with a straight line, then you have a plane, and then you have volume space. That does not work because it has a right angle zero at the center. That fails geometrically, and it fails mathematically. Your entire body of holy, worshipful scientists is absolutely stupid. Absolutely ridiculously, backwardly stupid. And it's a moral issue. They refuse to see what's right in front of their eyes because they're dedicated to a lie. They will never, ever back down from their linear point of view. And that's why they're not going to make it. So I want you to actually have the truth that you need to make the decisions that you need to make. And this is the value of quantum mechanics. To get the solution implies that now you understand that continuity is what men cannot see. And therefore, continuity has to exist. It does, but it only exists on a sphere. There's no such thing as continuity in linear systems. It has to be quantized or you can't make numbers. But in spherical space, the numbers are already composed into relationships that make them fluid. They're continuous. Only in spherical algebra can you portray the Boshkovich force curve. And the Boshkovich force curve defines physics at the quantum level. So that's what I'm going to show you another time from another angle to address the entanglement problem, which now you know how to conceptualize in your mind. That when you hear something about entanglement, you realize that they're using the wrong word because they're stupid. And they're using the word entanglement, and it has a deleterious effect on your consciousness because it's dissonance. Entanglement means a tangle. And the reason that word came into use was in the context of the logic system, where entanglement refers to entangled variables. However, in physics, it's anything but entanglement. It's not entangling at all. It's coordination. These are two electrons. The standard experiment for entanglement is two electrons that are brought into proximity, or in fact can be generated together, so that they have a known coordinated state. Now, it can be shown that these two have the coordinated state, and all of this is difficult to do, I think you understand. But once it can be established that the two particles are coordinated, now they can be separated linearly. The new vision that puts you head and shoulders above all the other scientists is you can see what's happening when these two entangled particles are separated spatially. You have learned how to see what's happening. The scientists cannot see what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing when they separate these two particles. They don't see it geometrically. They only see it mathematically, which means it has to be quantized, because the difference between state A and state B, in this case, the two states are entangled, and so you have to make two measurements to recorrelate them in their separated state, so that when you change one of them, you measure how long it takes for this one to change. It has been shown by excruciatingly difficult tests that when these two separated entangled particles, when either one of them is changed, the other one changes instantly with no event lag. And that's the quantum paradox that cannot be explained. We can explain it, right? Do you remember? What is happening when these two particles are being separated in space? You can see what's happening. They're being separated in space. That much is known because it can be measured. It's measured with a linear separator of whatever that distance is. It's a number. Well, a number is a quantum. It denotes position only. That's all it can show is position. These are not positional objects. They're being separated in a space in which they only half exist. So as they're being separated spatially, all you have to do is turn it 90 degrees and now look at the separation when you're looking at it down the barrel. Now how much separation is there? None. That's event space that's perpendicular to spatial space. And that's your second introduction to quantum mechanical solution. I should have another word at the end of that sentence. That's your introduction to quantum mechanical solution algorithmization. That's how you do it, is by learning to see perpendicularly into time. Now what can that do for you? I can't predict what that might do for you, but I can warn and encourage you from my own experience, it will affect you if you exercise your new faculty of being able to see reality. Because now you're going to be able to see invisible reality that no one else can see. What you do with that depends on whether you have any orientation or not. If you have no orientation, not even you can predict what you're going to do with that. But if you do have orientation already, or you're able to develop an orientation from this information, either way, you're going to find a snap. It's a snap to focus. It's a snap to new conceptualization. It's sudden. You both have to allow it and you have to force it. It's semi-voluntary. Because it does require an effort. You actually have to try to see what you just learned. And what did we just learn? What did we just learn? That when when a particle is thought to be two particles, because they're coordinated and separate, you can see that they're really not two particles. They're the same particle. When you coordinate them, they're now the same. But they're not the same in space. We can see that. You have to trust your vision, yes. But those two particles do not think that they have separate positions. Well, the only way those particles can think that is if they're in another dimension. Well, that dimension is not plus and minus. It's not polar valency. It's perpendicular. They're orthogonal. How so? Because on a circle, it has two linear dimensions. A circle is a planar object. But we discovered that the circle is a two-component, two-data type object. It is the intersection of space and time. It's where time and space are the same. We call that space-time. Okay, but Albert linearized time. Well, time is not linear. In our way of looking at things, because we've linearized time, we can only see it as a linear separation. We can't see it spherically because we had never learned how. So we don't see the invisible second dimension. This part of this is a circle oscillating, okay, 2 on a frequency 2. Boing, boing, boing. It's marking out time because there's motion. Well, that motion essentially is the other dimension. It's the dimension where motion is possible. In space, it's positional only. We only know of space by position. So we think of space as consisting of, well, infinitely many separate positions. Well, it's not infinite if they're positions. There can't be an infinite number of positions because positions are discrete. And if you have a discrete number of positions, it's not infinite. And it's the same problem. You can go the way of Cantor and Hilbert and make their same mistake and try to pretend that it's continuous, but your number system will not allow it to be continuous because numbers are quanta. They're position quanta, finite position. Well, if you're separating two finite positions, you can see the space separation. What you can't see is that when the particles are in the entangled state, they're in the coordinated state, and when you separate them in space, you are not separating them in the invisible dimension. That solves the quantum paradox, because now you know where these two particles are. They're in event space. Events are measured by motion, and there's no motion. The whole point of the spatial separation is that they're static with relation. They have a fixed distance. Well, that fixed distance is only one of the two perpendicular aspects of its reality. You're only seeing its spatial separation. But now you can indirectly observe the event separation as that which you cannot measure, as that which you cannot even perceive. And so you've opened up your perceptual system to the hidden dimension. It's equivalent to to discovering that gravity is a spherical force field, but it's practically the inverse of that. So we say that time is the invisible dimension. That's not true. And Albert's construction is inaccurate because he's using time as the other axis. The reason it works is that space has already been linearized to 3D. He started with an ordinary 3D grid that already has a flaw in it. And what he did was, he took the circular component, which is basically one measure of energy is time. That's one of the two measures. Frequency is time. Wavelength is the spatial component. So space and time are on the circle, bound together in a continuous motion through virtual space. That circle does not represent space. It does have a radius, however. But what's inside that radius? What's inside that radius cannot be measured. It cannot be measured with linear numbers, but it can be measured on the Boschkovich force curve, which goes through the quantum instead of jumping over it, such that it's quantized, so you have to jump over it. To get from one position to the other, you jumped over something real. So space-time is not violated by entanglement. It demonstrates the geometry of space-time. I hope that helps. That's 43 minutes. We'll be back with more